In this video, I'm going to show you how to build your own chatbot like Chat GPT-3. In Figma, I've designed a chat interface that looks like the following. Let me quickly run you through it. So we have a head with an image, which is the logo from OpenAI. Then we have the name of the chatbot. I just called it chatbot. Then we have the chat dialog where you can see the messages. It's pretty straightforward. And then we have an input where we can type a message and a button where we can send or give a message. So the goal is to build a chat interface where we can ask the bot a question and the bot will return with a reply. Let's start with building a front end. We do this by creating a new Next.js app and configure it with Tailwind to handle all the styling. So let's create a new directory. I call this OpenAI chatbot, direct into this folder. Now we are going to create a new Next app, yarn create Next app. I call this client. Since the Next app is going to serve as our client, I'm going to build the backend with Koa. If you use Express, you can easily follow this tutorial along and just install the packages for Express instead of Koa. If you want to skip to the part where we handle the backend, go ahead. We are going to build the front end first. So I call this client. We are not going to use TypeScript, so press no. No to EaseLint. Press yes to use the source directory. And then no for the experimental. Now the Next.js app has been successfully created. If we do ls, we can see the folder client has been created. Let's create one more folder for the server. We are going to use that later. And now let's open your code editor. Open the client folder. Next always comes with unnecessary files. Let's remove those. So in source folder and then the pages, we can remove the API folder. In the index.js, we can remove all the imports, remove this line, and remove all of the HTML. We just added text with chat here and save it. In the styles directory, we can remove the home.module.css file. Let's open the terminal and start the client and see if it's still working. Run yarn dev. Be aware that you have to be in the client folder. And as we can see, it's still working perfectly. Let's now install and configure Tailwind. We first have to install it. We need Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. Save this as a dev dependency. What we can do now is npx tailwind init. It will generate a Tailwind and post CSS config file. As you can see, they both have been created. Open the tailwind.config.js file. At content, we need to add a new line. Save it. Now head over to globals.css. Remove everything. Now we need to add the Tailwind directives. What I'm also going to do is, in the Figma, we use the font Ledo, so I'm going to import this. In here you can select the styles, then on the right top here you can view selected families. And then you can click on import, copy this. And then I'm going to import it at the top here. Then go back to your tailwind.config.js file, and at extend we can add a new font. Type Ledo here. Now we can close this file. We can close this file as well. And if we now go to our document.js file, this file should be automatically generated when you create your Next app. If it didn't create the file, you can just create it on your own and copy everything that I have here. We are going to give the HTML some classes. So font Leto. I'm going to give all the text some letter spacing. And I'm going to give the background a color. Let's save it. If we now start the client and refresh it, we can see our background color changed and we use the font Ledo. So now we know that Tailwind has been successfully installed and we can now move on with building the actual chat interface. Let's create a new folder. We call this components. Then in this directory, we create a new file called chat.jsx. Then we export a function called chat. We give the chat some styling and then give it some border radius and some padding. And now if we go to our index.js file, we can now import the chat component that we just created, and we can add it here. So now we can see that our chat component is here, the one that we just created. What I want to do is put this in the center of the screen. So let's give the main some classes. So the width of the main is going to be full. It's going to have 100 view height. Then we add flags, item center, and then justify center. Now we can see our chat is exactly in the middle of our screen. What we still need to do is make the head, the chat dialog, and the input. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component for each, and we just work from top to bottom. So we are going to start with a head. So let's create a new folder here with chat and create a new component with head. We export a function again with head. Let me close the terminal because it's annoying. So we need the OpenAI logo. I'm going to use it as a SVG. I'll copy the path here and save it. What I'm going to do is add some props here. Otherwise we can add class names to it. We want to put the logo inside of a div. And as you remembered, we had a text with Chatbot. Let's give this logo some width and height. Let's now import the head here in the chat and add it here. Let's now style the head. We want to put the items in the center. The div around the logo, we want to give it a background color. We want to put the logo in the center. Add some padding and give it some border radius. Then the text should be wide. Let's make the text a little bit bigger. Now the only thing that we need to do is give it some margin on the left so it's not attached to the logo. 4 should be fine, and this looks perfect. In the Figma you can see we have a divider. Let's create that now. Open the chat.jsx file. In here we create a new div. Give it some classes. The height going to be 1 pixel. And then we give it some margin on the top and the bottom. And then give it a background color. And that's looking sharp. Now let's build the chat dialog where we eventually can see the messages. So let's create a new component with messages.js6. Export a default function messages. And then return a div. Let's close all the unnecessary files that we have open. I forgot to export it as a default function. Now we can import the messages there. And then we add it here. And at our chat file, we want to create some dummy messages. What I want to do is create a new state with messages. So let's import use state from React. And then in here, we can create a new state with messages. Thanks GitHub Copilot. So let's create some dummy messages here. Hello, how are you? Type, we do bot, and then time. For the time, I don't want it to be hard coded. So what I'm going to do is use a library called datefns. So I'm going to stop the server and then type yarn add datefns. Run the server again. And from datefns, we can import format relative. And then in here we can do format relative new date and then do new date again. Let's create a few more messages. I'm fine, thank you. Here we do user. And then here we add a new message. How can I help you? And then we do bot again. And this is fine for now because these are just dummy messages. And now we can prop down the messages in the messages component. And then in our messages component, we can now grab the messages prop. And now we can create a new function with message. So here we use the props from the message. So we used message, type, and time. And then we return a div with message for now. And then here we can map through our messages. And then we add the message component here, add the index as the key, and prop down the message. And close the tag and save it. Let's change this to message, to the actual message. And if we now go to our browser, we can see the messages here. So let's give the chat dialog some styling. It's going to have a width of 600 pixels. Max height. It's going to have an overflow so you can scroll. Now if we have a lot of messages, we can scroll through the dialog. What I don't like is the basic styling of the scroll bar here. So I'm going to get rid of this. So in our globals.css file, we can create a new class with scroll bar height. And we can use what GitHub Copilot suggested and then add a new class with scroll bar height and then use the WebKit and save it. And now if we go to our messages, we can now add scroll bar height here. And now we can see it disappeared. So now let's style the actual messages. So what I want to do is wrap this message around another div. And then put the message in a p tag. And then put our time in a span. And here we give this a class. We actually give it some inline styling. So first we add a flex class. Then we are going to add the flex call class because we want the message and the time be underneath each other. We put it in the middle, use text wide, use some border radius and some padding. And what we can do here is we can do if the type is equal to both, we can give it a different background color. And if this is not the case, we give it a different background color. And now we got this. So now let's make the span of the time a little bit smaller and give it a different color when the message is sent from the bot. So for the text, we make it extra small, some margin at the top. And here we can do if type is equal to bot, then the text should be gray. Perfect. What we want to achieve now is when the message is sent from the bot, we want it to be on the left. And when the message is sent from the user, we want it to be on the right. So we can do this really easily by adding a class to the top div. And then add flex, item center. And then if the type is equal to the bot, we wanted to give it a justify start. If it's not, we want to give it justify end. So now we can see that the message is here on the left and from the user on the right, and then from the bot on the left again. So this is perfect. The only thing that we need to do now is for the messages, you can see that the messages have border radius. For the bot message, we want the top left border to have a border radius of none. For the message from the users, we want the right bottom corner to have 0 border radius. So here, messages from the bot, we do rounded top left none. And then for the user, his messages, we do rounded bottom right none. Save it, and this should do the job. Yes, it does, and this looks perfectly. So now the only thing that is left before we start with the backend is the input, where we can actually type our message and send the message. So let's handle that. At our chat.jsx, we can now copy this divider again and paste it in here. And now let's create a new component for the form. Export a default function again. So at our chat.jsx component, we can here import the form and then add it to the bottom here. And let's start with adding an input. And then we want to give the input a value. The value is going to be the message. So we are going to create a state for that. So we are going to import useState again from React. And then here we create a new state with message. And then we do set message. This has to be an empty string. And then here we can do value message. And then we can add a onChange. So when we type something, we can then set the message to the e.target value. And then we add a placeholder here with type your message here. And if we would now display the message here and go to our browser, if we now type something, we can see our message right here as we change it. Remove this message here. Add some classes to our form. Now let's style the input. Let's give it a background color. Text should be white, and we give the placeholder text color. It's going to be gray. Text should be small. Let's give some border radius, some padding. The width should be full. And outline, we do none. So this looks perfectly. So now we need to create the actual button to send the message. You can also send the message just by pressing enter, but I would like to have a button as well. So in the button we want to have an icon. Let's create a variable for that. Let's add the path, and in here we can add the props as well, so we can give it some styling. And now we can add the icon here. Add some classes to it. And then let's add type submit to the button. And now we still have to create a function for this, but we are going to style the button first. So if we hover on the button, we want the opacity to be half. And when we click on it and it becomes active, we want the opacity to be 100 again. Then give it a transition. And add some padding. Then add some border radius. Now it should look like this. But what we want is the button should be in this div. So we want to give it a class of absolute, but we want to give the form a class of relative. So we give the button an absolute class, and the form we give it a relative class. Now it looks like this, and we want it to be on the right. And then at last we want to give it a little bit of margin on the right here. Perfect. So what we want to do is we want to prop down this set messages to our form component. So we do this by adding set messages here, and then just add the set messages here. And then when we go back to our form, we can now grab the set messages from here And now let's create a function to send the message. Prevent it from default, otherwise it will refresh the site. Then let's check if a message has been set. Otherwise return it. And then we can set the messages. Do like this. We use the format relative here, but we first have to import it from datefns because we didn't import it on the form. So let's do that. And now at our button, we can add an onClick. And if we click on it, we want to fire the send message function. So let's see if it works. And send it. We can now see our message has popped up. Great. We can now remove the dummy data. And remove the format relative from here. And now we can see that no messages are displayed. So what we can do is some conditional rendering. So at our messages, we can do something like messages.length. If it is, show the messages. And if it isn't, then show a div with no messages yet, or something like ask the bot anything. And then you can type a question here. And then we can see our message. So this was basically it for the client. We only need to set up an actual post request so we get a reply from the bot. But for that, we first have to set up the server. So let's close all the tabs that are open. Minimize the client folder. Then open the terminal and create a new terminal. Direct in the server directory. Let's now initialize a package.json file. Press enter to everything. Let's install all the packages that we need for our server. So of course we need Koa. If you use Express, just install Express instead of Koa, but be aware to install all the right dependencies. So we need Koa router. We need cores. We need a body parser. I installed .env to store our API key from OpenAI. And then we need OpenAI, of course. Install this. As a dev dependency, I'm going to install NodeMon, so we don't have to restart our server every time we make a tiny change. Let's create a script for that. Let's create a new index.js file. Let's do a console log here with test and run our server. We can see it runs just fine. Let's import all the packages that we just installed. Now let's require configuration and OpenAI API from the OpenAI package. Then let's now create a new instance of Koa. New instance of the router. Let's add a new port variable. We are going to run our server on port 4000. We don't have this variable yet, so let's create a .env file. Add port here. We add 4000. Then now let's set up the configuration for OpenAI. And in here we have to specify the API key. So let's create a new variable in our .env file. We can grab the OpenAI API key from the official OpenAI website. So when you're in your account, you can click on the top right on personal, view API keys. And then in here, you can generate a new API key. As you can see, I already generated 2 API keys, but for the sake of this video, I will generate a new one. Now that the API key has been generated, you can copy it here. Be aware to never share this API key with someone else, because basically anyone with your API key can create requests on your behalf, and you don't want that to happen. Especially because the API costs money. As you can see, we use the DaVinci model and it costs 2 cents per 1000 tokens. And in here you can see prices are per 1000 tokens. You can think of tokens as piece of word, where 1000 tokens is about 750 words. And this paragraph is 35 tokens. And to not disappoint you, if you create a new OpenAI account, you actually get $18 free to spend, so you can test out the API and do whatever you like with it. So after we copy the API key, we can now paste it in our .env file. Let's now apply our middleware. And let's now run our server on our given port. The only thing that is left right now for the server is create the actual post request. So we want to send a message with the post request. So we can grab this from the body. Then we can create a new OpenAI API instance with our configuration. And then we can create a response. We use the create completion function. Then we have to specify the model. We use the text DaVinci model. You should definitely check out their documentation where there's everything about their models, because each model is used for different use cases. And you are able to customize the base models for your specific use case. But as you can see here, we are using the text DaVinci version 3. It's the most capable GPT-3 model, can do any task the other models can do, often with higher quality, longer output and better instruction following. Also supports inserting completions with text. So that's pretty cool. So then we have to send a prompt. This is going to be the message that we get from our CTX request.body. Then we can specify max tokens. The max tokens is basically the maximum number of tokens to generate in the completion. So I'm just using 100. Then we can specify the temperature. And what this means is the higher the value means the model will take more risks. So 0.9 will give you a more creative response. And if you use something like 0, it will come with a more defined answer. And as I said, if you want to customize this bot to your own needs, you should definitely check out their documentation where they explain everything about the models and the requests and everything that you would like to know. So what we can do now is we can send a body back to our client. We send it as a message. And we can grab it from response.data.choices. And then we do 0. And then we grab it to text. And then add CTX status 200. So in Postman, let me quickly create this route and test if it works before we are going to add it to our client. So as our body, we send a message. And we add something like, hello, how are you doing? And as you can see, we will now get a response. I'm doing well, thank you, how about you? And when we ask, for example, what is 9 plus 9? It will give us the answer 18. So this was basically it for the server. Let's now implement it back into our client. So we can close the server. So we can open our form.js6. We need a package to send our request, so we are going to add Axios. Don't forget to run the client again. Okay, now we can import Axios here. And then we can create our actual response. We call this message response. So async function. And here we can grab the data from our post request. And here we need to make the call to our server. And remember, we made the message route. And then we can send the message as the body. Let's console log this data for now. And then here we can do await message response. We first have to make this a async function, otherwise await won't work. Save it, open your browser, and then send something like, hello, how are you doing? And then send it. And if you go to our console log, we can now see a response here. And we want to actually clear this text after we send a message. So here we can just do simply set message to, and the only thing that is left is we have to add the response to our messages. So here we do set messages, priv. We can add the previous array and then add the message, and we can grab it from our data. Then the type is bot because the message is from the bot, and then at the time like so, like we did before, and this should do the job. So if we now refresh this and we ask the bot anything, what is 9 times 9? And we send it. It will now reply with 81, and we can ask it anything. What is the definition of coding? And it will reply. But as you can see, if the message is longer, we didn't add padding here. So we can easily fix this by going to our messages here and then add space y and then 4. And now we can see it has some padding at the top and the bottom. So we created a really cool chatbot like Chat GPT-3 ourselves. Before I'm going to quit this video, I want to give you a little bonus. So what we can do to make the chat more interactive, we could add transitions when a message has been sent. I'm adding a new package called Framer Motion. Start our server again. And then here we can import motion from Framer Motion. And now we can add motion.div here, and we can do initial. So when the div initially renders, we can set the opacity to 0 and then the y to 20. And then we can add animate, and we can set the opacity to 1 and the y to 0. And now when we send a message, you can see the message pops in with an animation. And we have a little bug when there are a lot of messages being sent. So let's ask the bot some more questions. Damn, he can. You can see the messages are down here. What I want to do is when a new message got sent, I want to immediately scroll to the bottom. So let's import use effect and use ref from React. And then here we can do const messages and ref is use ref null. And then we can create a new function, scroll to bottom, do messages and ref current, scroll into view behavior smooth. And then we can use effect here and then add the scroll to bottom, and then it needs to react when a new message has been sent. And then here at the bottom, we can add a new div and add a ref with messages and ref. And when we now, so if we, for example, scroll to the top and then ask the bot, where are you from? It will scroll to the bottom. Perfect. I hope you learned something from this video, and if you did, make sure you drop a like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate that. And for now, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you later.